Hello, Ben Bowers, the Spirit Specialist, and I'm here today to talk to you about the second of 4 seasonal releases from the Lochlea Distillery. This is the Harvest Edition. We had the Sowing Edition a few months back. I can never remember whether it's fallow or farrow. I think it's fallow because the fields are basically empty and dormant because they've been harvested, because at some point early next year we will get a ploughing edition as well. So it's 4 bottlings from Lochlea that are representations of 4 key parts through the farming year. I have opened the bottle, which I will do for the review because I want to tell you about them and I want to try it myself. But the rest of that bottle will be put towards the first 6 releases from Lochlea. So at some point next year, there will be a tasting of the first 6 releases from the Lochlea Distillery. I've got our barley and I've got a first release and a sowing out the back. The rest of that will go towards it. And then when the other 2 come out, once we've got that, we'll set a date. Maybe somebody from the distillery might even join us. But in terms of the Harvest Edition, before I tell you what it tastes like, let me give you some background information about the distillery, but then also the makeup of this particular whiskey.
The Lochlea Distillery is a conversion of the farm buildings at Lochlea Farm, situated 8 miles south of Kilmarnock, and at which the world-famous Scottish writer and poet Robert Burns lived and worked from 1777 to 1784. Plans for a distillery by the current owner Neil McGeoch were approved in 2014 and whisky production commenced in August 2018. Malcolm Rennie, who'd previously been distillery manager at the likes of Bruichladdich, Ardbeg, Kilchoman and Annandale, initially worked with Neil as a consultant before coming on board full-time to oversee the birth of the whisky. However, he then left to join the rebirth of the Rosebank Distillery in October 2021 and was replaced by John Campbell, who had previously been the distillery manager at Laphroaig for 16 years. The distillery is another new whisky venture who are producing a grain-to-glass spirit. They grow their own barley in fields literally over the road and have their own water source. The bottle itself features embossing referencing the tyre tracks that surround the farm as well. Lochlea Harvest Edition is the second of 4 seasonal releases that represent the farming year that began with sowing, then runs through harvest, fallow and ploughing. It's a marriage of spirit matured in ex-Bourbon, ex-Oloroso sherry and ex-port casks to add a more fruity note to the already established Lochlea House style of cereals and cut grass. In comparison, the initial Sowing Edition was matured solely in ex-Bourbon casks and bottled at a slightly higher alcohol level of 48%, whereas the Harvest Edition is bottled at 46% ABV.
Okay, so as I say, this one is open because the vast majority of it is going to be used for a tasting event. So I don't want to take too much, but I do want enough to actually try the thing. One of those chunky necks that make it a little bit hard to pour kind of with some degree of finesse. The label, they have said that they've used this kind of pinky red colour to evoke the soil, what the soil looks like once it's been harvested. Whether that's actually the case or not, but at least it differentiates it from the Sowing Edition, which was, from recollection, that kind of bluey colour. And it'll be interesting to see what colours we then get for the other 2. Boxed as well. I do like these bottles. I love the texture on it that evokes the tyre tracks, etc, etc. But what we do have here, and I think I recall saying when I did the Sowing Edition review, was it will be very interesting to see if there is some kind of change within the flavour profile that sort of evoke the particular time of year. And it maybe seems like they have done that with the view of talking about the fact that there is now port maturation as well as Oloroso and ex-Bourbon as well. So I'm hoping that does kind of evoke this particular time of year, this kind of slightly autumnal, slightly warmer, and it'll be interesting to see if that is the case, whether the other 2 progress on as well. So, on the nose, light, fresh. Now Lochlea is already getting a house style, and it very much for me personally is being stood in fields of grain. That's sort of what the nose and the flavour has evoked for me in particular. Very much kind of fields, not a farm feel, but stood in the fields that the farm owns. And I think that's a deliberate move. It's there, but this feels a bit warmer. It feels a bit fruitier. Now, what I don't know is what the proportion is of cask makeup. How much is port, how much is sherry, how much is ex-Bourbon. What I might do is go back to the sales guy that I know, see if I can get those details from him, because it's not split in terms of any of the information I've been sent through. So I don't know whether they either know that or willing to share it, or it's just one of those things. But I'll see if I can find out, probably put it as a subtitle. But it feels to me like the port is a bit more upfront. There is a definite red berry note on this, but you do get that kind of waves of grain coming through as well. Grain in terms of cereal, fields of grain. This is 100% malted barley, but it's not just barley. You get that feel of kind of fields of wheat and corn and all sorts of stuff kind of being outside. But there's a light citrusy feel to this too. And that red berry note kind of turns it into strawberries and raspberries and red fruit, kind of light red fruit, right on the palate. That red fruit really does come through. Much more of that. Now, they talk about house style of cut grass as well as cereals. The cereals I get, the cut grass, I don't pick up so much. That's not to say it's not there for other people. It's just something I very much get that cereal element. On the palate, it's more like Cheerios. And whereas it's been Cheerios in cold milk in some of the previous bottlings, this is starting to feel a little bit warmer. And I do think, again, it's that port cask. Now, there are some, in fact, I spotted it yesterday when we went shopping, things like Rice Krispies multigrain shapes, has that sort of malty character, a bit like Cheerios. And I spotted yesterday that they do one where it's Rice Krispies multigrain shapes, which are a little bit sweeter than just normal Rice Krispies. Bit more maltier, but they do like a red fruit flavor. So there are some of the multigrain shapes that are kind of like pink because they're strawberry flavor. There is a sort of strawberry and raspberry feel in here as well. Again, it's slightly more summer berries than it is autumn berries, darker red fruit, that sort of feel. The light youthfulness of the whiskey itself, the inherent youthfulness that's there, which makes it lighter, as well as that lighter body that they are deliberately doing, makes the red fruit notes that I think is coming from the port less plums and damsons and more strawberries, summer pudding, that sort of feel. But it's summer pudding that's got blackberries and blackcurrant in it. It just doesn't dominate it. There's a really nice fruitiness to this. It's light, it's zingy. There is a zingy zestiness to it as well. There's a touch of lemon peel, even a hint of orange oil in there, and red fruits. A little hint of red currant in there. Touch of drying oak on the end of it, but it's not overpowering, it's not drying. It is kind of that, it's not autumnal, it's not warming, but it's not quite as light as a summer whiskey. It does have, we're starting to get to that fruitiness where we start to see the nights draw in, and it's that there's the occasional day that's a little bit chilly, but then there's also the day where it's actually surprisingly warm, and you don't know if you need to put a jumper on. Because if you go out with a jumper on, it's probably going to be warm and you'll need to take it off and carry it around. But if you don't go out with a jumper, you're going to regret it. I'm sounding like a dad, because I am one. But if you don't take a jumper with you, you're probably going to regret it. You'll get cold about mid-afternoon. It's that sort of feel where it's kind of like warm, but also a little bit chilly on occasions, and the mornings are a little bit cold and everything like that. And it doesn't scream out September, but I kind of get it. And I'm really now fascinated to see what the next two do. Whether there is the progression where it becomes warmer and more suited to it's cold outside, let's have a whiskey to kind of warm up, whether it has that feel of it. Because I can see a deliberate attempt to evoke a particular season here going on with that use of the port cask, adding that red fruit element. I'm so intrigued to see how it progresses, and I'll be fascinated to see what they're like one after the other side by side. I could have done the sowing side by side with this, but I'm going to wait for the seasonal editions. I'm going to do it all in one go as part of the tasting. Maybe do it as a video if I've got any left over, but the intention of the tasting was to get these seasonal editions and let's do them one after the other. So we'll do first release, we'll probably do our barley, and then we'll do the seasonal editions to see how this, if it's a deliberate kind of, right, we are deliberately making 4 different whiskies with different maturation profiles, that sort of thing, to try and evoke these 4 periods through a farming year. Does it do that? On its own, it's difficult to say, oh, this tastes like September. But it could well be depending on what Fallow, whatever it is, and Ploughing, what their flavor profiles are like, it might actually become more obvious. Oh yeah, you can see this kind of year progress through liquid form. I think it's excellent. I think it maintains that Lochlea house style. That house style is not as prevalent here as it is on the Sowing, as it is on the R barley. The R barley you'd expect to, because that's their core bottling, as it were. But the house style is more prevalent on the Sowing, less on this. Again, be interesting to see how that develops. But it's still a really well-made whiskey. It's absolutely brilliantly done. Just to finish off, I really like that cereal element. It's not just barley. It's fields of wheat and barley and corn and everything else. A little bit of rye, but in field format, not in liquid form. It's kind of that, it's in the air. You can sort of sense it somehow. Your subconscious is going, I am stood in a field surrounded by waves of different types of cereal being grown, and I'm outside. I'm so impressed about how they're managing to do this. So there are not many of this. This is a limited edition. Essentially what I've got is already sold. I've already gone to my mailing list. So if you do want this, it's not available through the website, www.spiritspecialist.com, because they've essentially already been pre-sold. I need to go to my customer list. I had to do a ballot because it was too many people wanted more than I had. So I've had to ballot it out. But yeah, if you're wanting things like this from me, the best way of being able to get hold of them is to join the mailing list. I send emails out on occurrences where I've got something limited edition coming in, or a tasting event or something like that. So if you're interested in taking part in the Lochlea tasting event, which will be online, particularly, well, it's going to be online. I've already decided it's going to be an online tasting. And hopefully that means that we can get somebody from the distillery, maybe John, who knows, to join us wherever they may be. All that information goes to the mailing list first, before I put it on social media and everything like that. Normally a couple of days notice, in which you can then kind of purchase, buy tickets, go into the ballot, that sort of thing. And as with anything that I do on the ballot, if you support my business, that gives you a better chance of getting things like this. So the people that are getting a bottle of this are more often than not people that have already bought from me before, not just limited edition bottlings, not just the rare stuff, not people that are just cherry picking the rare stuff and not buying anything else. Support me and I'll reward you with a better chance of getting things like this, which is still pretty hard to get hold of. But it's a really, really good whiskey. I'm really impressed with what the team are doing in terms of there's clearly thought and intelligence and passion and integrity behind making this, and it's showing absolutely. And I'm fascinated to see how this particular range progresses and develops in terms of a flavor profile. Okay, that's me done. I shall see you in the next video. Cheers.